let's solve this absolute value inequality problem. So again, let's remember, in order to solve any absolute value problem, the first thing we have to do is get the absolute value by itself, which means we have to get rid of the things around it. So we are going to then look at PEMDAS, and remember that when we're solving, we're going to do PEMDAS backwards. So do I have anything that's being added or subtracted to my absolute value? Well, I do right here. I have a 9 being added, so I have to unadd 9, which means I'm going to subtract 9 on both sides. So that gives me 3. My absolute value signs are still there. I haven't gotten rid of it yet. And that's going to be less than or equal to 14. Okay. So now what do I need to do? I still want to get my absolute value by itself. 3 is being multiplied to the absolute value, so I have to divide 3 on both sides. So now I have the absolute value 5t minus 1 is less than or equal to 14 thirds. Okay? These aren't very pretty numbers, but that's okay. I'm not going to worry about it. They're just a number like any other number. Now I have my absolute value by itself. Once the absolute value is by itself, I can set up my problem into branch 1 and branch 2. Before I do that though, let's see if this is a AND or an OR problem. So if you remember, I'm going to go over here to the side, let's just do some thinking over here, some remembering, that if my absolute value is less than or equal to some number, what did I say? I said less than. That makes that an AND problem. If my absolute value is greater or greater than equal to some number, that's great or. Okay, so that's kind of a quick and dirty way of trying to figure out if it's an AND or an OR problem. So our absolute value is less than that number. So since this is less than, it's an AND problem. Okay, so we just want to keep that in mind. So let's go ahead and let's solve for t. So we're going to set up our branches. We have our as-is branch, which is branch 1, which is 5t minus 1 less than or equal to 14 thirds. In branch 2, remember, I'm going to take the opposite of what I see inside that absolute value. And that's going to be less than or equal to 14 thirds. Nothing changes. I'm just taking the opposite value of what was inside the absolute value. So now I'm going to add 1 to both sides. Well, remember, I have to have common denominators. So 1 is the same as 3 thirds. So I'm just going to write this as 3 thirds. That's the same as 1. So that means then I have 5t is less than or equal to, well, what is that? That's 14 plus 3, which is 17 thirds, And now I have to divide by 5. Okay, so now it's getting really messy, because then I'm going to end up dividing this fraction by 5. So instead of dividing by 5, what I want you to think about is dividing by 5 is the same exact thing as multiplying by 1/5. Do you see how that is the same as 5 divided by 5? So then I'm going to multiply by 1/5 over here. So this is the same as 5 over 5, because 5 times 1 is 5, divided by 5. I'll go ahead and write that out like this. 5 over 5, right? Isn't that what you would have written if you were dividing by 5? Which is less than or equal to 17 over 15. So that means t is less than or equal to 17/15, which is just a little bit bigger than 1. Now for branch 2, I could distribute that negative in, or I could multiply by a -1 to both sides. I'm going to multiply by the -1 on both sides. And the reason I'm saying that that's what I'm going to do is because this is a skill that if you start learning now will help you when we get to more complicated problems. So that was my -1. That was just how it was set up to begin with. So now I'm going to multiply -1 on both sides. So that makes this now positive. So this is the same as 1 times 5t minus 1 is less than or equal to, well, this becomes negative. Oops, I've got to remember, since I multiplied this side and this side by negative, my inequality has to flip. It goes the other way. So now this is -14/3. So my inequality goes the other way. So this is the same as 5t minus 1 is greater or equal to -14/3. So I have to get this 1 out of here. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides. Well, in order to add a 1 here, my denominator needs to be a 3. So that's the same as adding 3/3. Adding 1 is the same as adding 3/3. So that gives me 5t is greater than or equal to, well, I have -14 plus 3. So that gives me -11 over 3. Now just like on the other side, I don't want to divide by 5, because then I'll have this fraction divided by 5, and that's just kind of hard to deal with. So instead, dividing by 5 is the same as multiplying by 1/5. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 1/5. I'm going to do that little extra step of multiplying this through so that you can see, doesn't that look just like 5 divided by 5? It does, doesn't it? So this gives me -11 over 15. So that means t has to be greater than or equal to -11 over 15. So do you remember, was this an and or an or problem? This was an and problem. We're going to go way back up to the beginning. It was an and. Okay? That means what they share. So we want to go ahead and we want to graph this to see if they share anything. Because if they don't share anything, then that means there's no solution. So we're going to go ahead and graph this. So negative goes on the left, so I'm going to say that's -11/15, and positive goes on the right, so that's 17/15. Okay, so now let's look here. T is less than or equal to 17/15. Well, since it's got that little bit of an equals in there, that gets colored in. T gets smaller here as I go towards 0. 0 is somewhere down here. So that means this is going this way. Yes? And then I'm looking at this t. T is greater than or equal to -11/15. Well, since it's got that equal sign in the inequality, this bar, I'm going to color that in. And t gets larger. Ooh, that's where they share, right there. So it's in the middle. So my answer, I'm not done, I graphed it, so I want to make sure I write my answer right. You could write it like this, with the word "and" in between. Or you could think, well, x is right here. All these values in here are x. And I got -11/15 on this side, and I have 17/15 on this side. And my inequality signs go like that. So that means I could write my answer like this. So my answer could either be written like this, or this, and that.